Her car was in the lot. Her name was on the door. But somehow my wife wasn't at work. I hadn't planned on surprising her. I just grabbed her favorite lunch and decided to swing by her office. It was just a small gesture, something simple, meant to make her smile. But it ended up unraveling everything. The receptionist recognized me right away. "Oh, hey, you're Jenna's husband, right?" I nodded, holding up the bag. "Just dropping this off." She hesitated, just a second. Barely enough to notice. She stepped out for a client meeting. I looked at the clock, just past noon. I'd parked right next to her SUV on my way in. Same scratch on the bumper, same pink keychain hanging from the mirror. She hadn't left. "She drove there?" I asked. The receptionist blinked. "I'm not sure." I thanked her and walked out, trying not to let my thoughts spiral. Maybe she took a ride share. Maybe it really was a meeting. But then I saw it again. Her car, sitting there in the sun. Windows slightly cracked, unlocked. She never left it unlocked. I stood beside it for a full minute, trying to convince myself this wasn't what it looked like. But something didn't sit right. The lunch bag felt heavier than it should have. And the note I wrote? It felt ridiculous now, like a love letter sent to a stranger. I got into my car and sat for a while, thinking, replaying her late nights, the changes in her schedule, her sudden bursts of laughter at texts she never shared. This wasn't just lunch anymore. This was the start of something I couldn't ignore. I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe she walked. Maybe someone picked her up. Maybe I just showed up at the worst possible moment. But when I walked past her car again, something made me stop. The driver's door wasn't locked. Jenna never left her car unlocked, and not even in our own driveway. She was the kind of person who double-checked the locks every night before bed. The kind who kept a pepper spray keychain on her purse. I looked through the window. Her work laptop bag was still in the front seat. That didn't make sense. If she was in a meeting, especially one with a client, she would have brought it with her. I knew that because she never shut up about how dependent her job had become on that damn laptop. "I can't even go to lunch without someone pinging me on Slack," she used to say. But there it was, sitting out in plain sight. Something about it unsettled me. I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. But the crack had already formed, and I couldn't unsee it. I just noticed, the way a person notices a crack in a wall and keeps staring at it, wondering if it's always been there or if it's starting to spread. Later that night, over dinner, I asked, "How was your meeting?" She didn't flinch. "Exhausting," she said. "Numbers didn't match, had to redo the whole forecast." I nodded, pretending to believe her. She reached for her wine, casually, smoothly, too smoothly. That's when I remembered the receptionist's face. She had smiled at me? Yes, but it was that tight-lipped kind of smile, the kind you give someone right before they find out the truth. That night I laid in bed thinking about the unlocked car door, the laptop bag, the story she'd told me that didn't quite match the timeline. Not enough to accuse her of anything, but enough to plant a seed of doubt I couldn't unsee. In the days that followed, the little things started piling up. She stopped leaving her phone on the nightstand, and started bringing it into the bathroom every time. Her showers used to echo with music and bad singing. Now it was just silence, except for her voice, low and secretive, talking to someone I wasn't supposed to hear. When I walked in once, she flinched, turned off the call like she'd been caught cheating on a test. "Just work," she said. Work became her favorite word. Work's crazy this week. Work's been non-stop. I'm staying late for work. At first I believed her, but then I started keeping track. She left early, came home late, always had a story, always vague. Then there was the perfume. She wore a new scent, bolder, sweeter. I asked if she'd changed it, and she smiled without looking at me. Just felt like something different. And the wardrobe shift. Heels on days she used to wear sneakers, lipstick for internal meetings. I complimented her one morning, half joking. "Someone trying to impress the board." She grinned. "Maybe I'm just trying to impress you." But her eyes stayed on the mirror, not on me. One night, close to midnight, she was in the shower. Her phone buzzed on the sink. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. The screen lit up long enough for me to see the name, Martin Caldwell, my boss. It wasn't just the name, it was the time, the tone of the message. I caught a glimpse of the preview. "Can't wait. Same suite?" I didn't move, didn't breathe. When she stepped out of the bathroom a minute later, she snatched the phone off the counter like it was about to explode. Just work, she said, avoiding my eyes. Martin's being dramatic about some numbers. It's nothing. Her voice was steady, too steady, like she'd rehearsed it. I nodded, but something inside me was already cracking. I didn't know the full story yet, but I knew I wasn't crazy, and I was done ignoring the signs. The next morning, Jenna was in the shower, humming faintly behind the bathroom door. Steam curled into the hallway, and her voice was soft, almost careless. I walked past her desk to grab my keys when something caught my eye. Her laptop was open, not locked, just left there, glowing quietly. Her calendar was up. I hesitated for a second. Then I stepped closer. One event stood out, highlighted in bold blue. Client escrow meeting, confidential. The location? Lakefield Resort and Spa. Duration, Thursday to Friday. Attendees, Martin Caldwell and Jenna Thomas. I froze, not from shock, but from something colder, like the truth had already reached me before I could admit it. Martin Caldwell, her boss, the man who once smiled at me at a company dinner and called me lucky. Jenna had said a word about any trip, no packing, no hotel talk, no mention of Martin, but here it was, plainly scheduled. And Lakefield, I remembered Martin talking about that place once at a wine tasting event. Perfect for escaping the city when you need privacy, he'd said, smirking. That evening over dinner, I told her about a made-up supplier trip upstate. She barely reacted. Oh, well, I've got a full schedule Thursday and Friday anyway, she said. We both smiled. We both lied. Thursday morning, Jenna left just before 7 a.m. She wore a navy blazer, heels, and subtle makeup. She rolled her suitcase to the car and gave me a quick kiss goodbye. I'll be back tomorrow night, she said breezily. Don't forget to water the plants. I waited 15 minutes before I followed her. Lakefield Resort was 2 hours away, tucked into a lakeside forest with private villas and concierge service. I'd called ahead pretending to organize a corporate retreat. When I asked about availability, the receptionist said they only had one executive suite left. The other had been booked that morning by Mr. Caldwell. I checked in under a false name, booked the room next to theirs, and set up a discreet wildlife camera on the shared hedge line. I waited. By 2 p.m., I heard voices on the balcony next door. Then laughter. I edged toward my window and peeked through the curtain. There she was, my wife, in a sundress, barefoot, holding a wine glass, smiling brighter than she had in months. Martin stood beside her with a bottle of champagne, pouring it into her glass as if this was their anniversary. They kissed, long and slow, not new, not unsure, familiar. I hit record. She sat in his lap, laughing. They toasted. They fed each other bites of fruit and whispered things too low for my mic to catch. At one point, she leaned into his chest and closed her eyes like she was home. Then she said it, softly but clear. If he ever finds out. Martin chuckled. He won't. You're too careful. She laughed again, tucked her face under his chin. Sometimes I think I want him to. Why? Martin asked. She didn't answer. Just leaned in and kissed him again. Like the question never deserved a response. I stopped recording. They left the next day without a clue. Jenna walked into our house that night, set her bag down, and said, God, I'm exhausted. Martin just talked my ear off. I nodded. Rough trip? The worst. I'll never work with him alone again. I said nothing. Later that night, I waited until she was in the living room scrolling through her phone. I opened the laptop, played the footage, and called her in. I want to show you something, I said. She walked in without suspicion, until the first second of the video played. She froze. Her breath caught in her throat. The footage played her laughter first, then Martin's, then the kiss. Her face dropped. No, she whispered. No, 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 no. She darted forward like she could stop it, but I paused the screen with her smile frozen in mid-giggle. Please, she whispered. Tell me you didn't see all of it. Tell me this isn't real. I said nothing. Tears flooded her eyes in an instant. She staggered back like the floor had shifted beneath her. I didn't mean for this to happen. I swear to you, it wasn't supposed to be like this. Wasn't supposed to be like what? I asked, my voice low. It started off harmless, just work. I was stressed. He was comforting, and it snowballed. I didn't want this. I swear to you. You wanted it enough to lie. No, she cried, her voice breaking. I didn't mean to lie. I didn't know how to stop once it started. She dropped to her knees, sobbing, grabbing at my hand. Please, please, I love you. I never stopped loving you. I'll quit my job. I'll cut him off. Just don't leave me like this. I looked down at her, mascara smudged, breath hitching, voice cracking with desperation. You made your choice the moment you smiled at him like I didn't exist. She shook her head, still pleading. Please, I'll go to therapy. I'll do anything. Don't throw us away. Don't throw me away. I didn't throw anything away, I said coldly. You did. And with that, I walked out of the room. The days after the confrontation felt like moving through fog. Jenna barely left the bedroom. She kept the curtains drawn, lights off, sometimes curled under the blankets until noon. She stopped eating, barely spoke. Occasionally I'd hear her sobbing through the door or leaving whispered voicemails I never returned. Her voice sounded so small, like a child being punished, lost in her own house. I wasn't angry anymore, but I also didn't care. I moved into the guest room, put a lock on the door, started cooking for one. I left the TV on in the background just so the silence wouldn't feel so heavy. Some nights I'd catch her sitting on the bottom stair, just staring into space. She'd look up when I passed, her mouth twitching like she wanted to say something, but she never did. When she finally spoke, it was desperate. We can fix this. You and me. Please, I'll do anything. I didn't answer. She tried harder, printed out counseling resources, left handwritten letters on my nightstand, cooked my favorite meals. One night she stood outside the guest room door for nearly an hour, crying softly, whispering how sorry she was, that she had no idea how far she'd fallen, that she just wanted me back. But it was too late. I'd already watched her walk away from us, on camera, in real time, without a shred of hesitation. The following week I handed her the envelope with divorce papers. She stared at it for a long time. Then she looked at me, hollowed out. I thought you'd be angry, but not done. I didn't say anything. You're seriously walking away from everything we built. For this? No, I said flatly. You did. After she moved out, it didn't take long for the cracks to spread elsewhere. Martin's wife, Elena, wasn't blind. She'd seen signs for months, late nights, canceled trips, sloppy mistakes. Maybe she'd even suspected Jenna. But something finally snapped. A week after Jenna left, Martin was served with divorce papers, too. Then came the office fallout. Martin was asked to step down under the vague excuse of internal restructuring. But everyone knew. Whispers flew through the company halls. How he'd violated ethical conduct, blurred professional lines, and lost control. A few brave co-workers came forward with their own stories. One even accused him of promising a promotion in exchange for a weekend trip. Martin's career wasn't just wounded. It was over. Jenna tried to pick herself up. She sent me an email weeks later asking if we could talk. She said she was going to therapy, that she had quit drinking, that she realized how toxic everything had become. She wanted closure, or maybe forgiveness. I never replied. Mutual friends started to reach out, some to check on me, others to spill what they'd heard. Turns out the relationship between Jenna and Martin had been going on for months, maybe even before she started acting distant. They'd been seen together at conferences, at work dinners, even taking long lunch breaks no one thought twice about. But now that the truth was out, everyone was quick to admit they'd always had a feeling. Typical. And I moved into a small apartment not far from downtown. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. No reminders of what came before, no shared furniture, no ghosts of a marriage that had crumbled behind closed doors. The first night alone was the hardest. I sat on the floor eating Chinese takeout out of the box, staring at blank white walls. For the first time in weeks, I cried. Not because I wanted her back, but because I was finally letting go of the illusion. The idea that we had been happy, that she had loved me the way I had loved her. The worst part wasn't the cheating, it was realizing she stopped being mine long before she touched him. But slowly, I began to rebuild. I started running in the mornings, taking long drives on weekends. I reconnected with my brother, started painting again, even went to a few meetups just to be around new people. It wasn't glamorous, and the loneliness didn't vanish overnight, but every step felt like taking back a piece of myself. People asked if I missed her. I never knew how to answer that honestly. I didn't miss her. I missed the version of her I'd made up just to feel okay. The version of her I held on to when the cracks first appeared. The woman who laughed with me in grocery store aisles and held my hand under the table at dinner parties. But that woman had disappeared long before the affair, and I had spent too long loving a ghost. Now I was learning how to love someone real, myself. When someone cheats, people often assume it's about lust, about sex, about sneaking around for physical thrill. But that's not always true. Sometimes the deepest betrayal isn't what they did with someone else, but what they took from you. The safety, the honesty, the feeling that your home, your love, your time was sacred, that you were seen, valued, respected. My wife didn't just cheat on me. She dismantled a decade of trust brick by brick with every fake smile, every I love you spoken while texting him behind my back. She looked me in the eyes and lied day after day with a straight face and soft voice. And that was worse than the affair. Because the affair was just the symptom. The real damage came from how easily she abandoned the truth, how easily she convinced herself that I didn't deserve it. But here's what I've learned. You can survive betrayal. You can sit in the rubble of what you thought your life was, crying and shaking and unsure of how to breathe, and still come back stronger. Not because pain makes you invincible, but because when someone strips you down to nothing, you get to decide who you rebuild yourself into. I won't say I'm glad it happened, but I will say this. I know who I am now. I know what I will never tolerate again. I know how to listen to that quiet voice inside me that whispers, something isn't right. I ignored that voice for too long, made excuses for the inexcusable, tried to be understanding even when the evidence screamed at me. Never again. Love shouldn't ask you to shrink just to fit in, and it shouldn't silence your gut just to keep the peace. It should never survive at the cost of your dignity. Forgiveness is powerful, but so is self-respect. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't staying and fixing something that's broken. It's walking away, even when your heart begs you not to. So now I ask you, if someone you love betrayed you in the deepest way, would you rather try to fix it, risking the same pain again, or walk away to protect what's left of yourself? Let me know in the comments. Because sometimes the real healing starts when we stop pretending we're okay and start being honest with ourselves.